The ancient chamber of the Galactic Council pulsed with an electric tension that even the most seasoned diplomats could feel. Holographic projectors cast long shadows across the curved walls, their blue-white light reflecting off the scaled, metallic, and crystalline surfaces of delegates from 100 different worlds. At the center of this cosmic assembly stood Jessica Hartley, humanity's ambassador, a woman who looked less like a traditional diplomat and more like a weapon barely contained by her tailored charcoal suit. The chamber itself was a marvel of interstellar engineering, suspended in the neutral space between star systems. Constructed centuries ago, it represented the pinnacle of collaborative design, a massive spherical structure that could transform its internal environment to accommodate the atmospheric, gravitational, and environmental needs of its diverse occupants. Today, however, the chamber felt more like a pressure cooker about to explode. Jessica's fingers brushed against the holographic interface embedded in her sleeve, a piece of human technology that already made the most advanced alien communication devices look primitive. Her eyes, a steel gray that seemed to cut through the accumulated political nonsense of millennia, swept across the assembled delegates. Zornak, the Craxian representative, shifted uncomfortably. His exoskeleton, normally a display of intimidation, now seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice carrying a precision that suggested years of military training underlying her diplomatic veneer. "We are gathered to discuss a matter of unprecedented significance." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Galactic Council rarely addressed anything of true significance anymore. It had devolved into a bureaucratic nightmare, a place where complex interstellar issues were buried under layers of protocol and intentional obfuscation. The holographic display behind Jessica flickered to life. Star charts, trade routes, and economic data began to dance across the projection. But these were not the sanitized reports typically presented. These were raw, unfiltered records that showed a systematic pattern of suppression that had existed for centuries. Ambassador Corell of the Nexus Confederation leaned forward, mandibles clicking in a gesture of curiosity. The insectoid diplomat's compound eyes reflected the shifting data, catching every nuanced detail. Something was different about this presentation. Something was wrong. Jessica continued, her words calculated and precise. For millennia, the current galactic power structure has maintained a carefully constructed illusion of stability. What I am about to reveal will demonstrate that this stability is nothing more than an elaborate mechanism of control. The first piece of evidence materialized, a comprehensive timeline of technological suppression. Emerging civilizations that had shown promise were systematically limited, their development artificially constrained by economic sanctions, communication blockades, and strategic interventions by the more established galactic powers. Zornak's translator implant buzzed with increasing frequency, struggling to process the implications of the data. The Craxian delegation had always considered themselves masters of political manipulation, yet here was a human diplomat about to tear apart their carefully constructed narrative. "Take the Orion cluster colonies," Jessica said, zooming in on a specific region of space. 17 separate civilizations have been prevented from achieving faster-than-light travel, not through direct military intervention, but through a complex web of economic and technological restrictions. The data was irrefutable. Star charts showed potential trade routes that had been systematically blocked, technological patents that had been buried, and communication channels that had been deliberately disrupted. This was not just information. This was a weapon more powerful than any physical armament. Ambassador Corell's antennae began to twitch, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. The human was not just presenting a case. She was conducting a comprehensive takedown of the entire galactic political system. Jessica's hand moved again, and additional layers of data began to overlay the existing projection. Economic flows, technological development curves, population growth statistics. Each layer revealed another aspect of the systematic oppression that had been hiding in plain sight. The chamber grew so quiet that the subtle hum of the holographic projectors became deafeningly loud. Delegates from species that had considered themselves powerful began to look small, insignificant in the face of this revelatory moment. "We are not here to simply present a problem," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a tone that promised both challenge and transformation. "We are here to fundamentally reshape the understanding of galactic civilization." And then, with a precision that would be remembered for generations, she prepared to deliver the statement that would change everything. The spark was about to become a wildfire. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, humanity's most closely guarded secret hummed with potential energy. The Colorado Advanced Research Facility, officially non-existent on any government record, stretched across 3 underground levels, each one more classified than the last. Here, the true extent of human technological preparation was taking shape, far from the prying eyes of both terrestrial and extraterrestrial observers. Colonel Marcus Rodriguez stood before a massive holographic display, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. Decades of military strategy and covert operations had prepared him for this moment. The display showed a complex network of quantum computing arrays, each one a marvel of engineering that made the most advanced alien technologies look like children's toys. "System diagnostic at 99.87%, announced Dr. Elena Martinez, her fingers dancing across a quantum interface that seemed to respond to her thoughts as much as her touch. The room around her was a cathedral of technology, walls lined with cooling systems that could freeze a nuclear reactor, quantum processors that could calculate more permutations in a second than most civilizations could in a decade. The facility had begun as a desperate response. 27 years ago, when the first confirmed extraterrestrial contact occurred, humanity's leadership understood that survival would depend on more than diplomatic niceties. They had watched, they had studied, and most importantly, they had prepared. A holographic simulation materialized, a detailed model of galactic political structures, technological development curves, and potential conflict scenarios. Each projection was a masterpiece of predictive analysis, running millions of potential outcomes every millisecond. The human approach was not about overwhelming force, but about understanding and manipulating complex systems. "The Nexus Confederation's latest communication encryption is breaking down," Martins reported, her voice calm despite the revolutionary implications. "Our quantum decryption matrix is proving more effective than our initial projections." Rodriguez nodded, his eyes never leaving the holographic display. Each alien civilization had believed they were playing a complex game of interstellar chess. Humanity was playing 4-dimensional quantum Go. In another section of the facility, prototype starships sat in massive underground hangars. These were not traditional spacecraft, but adaptive platforms that could reconfigure themselves based on mission parameters. Nano-adaptive hull materials could shift molecular structures to respond to different environmental challenges. Fusion drives incorporated quantum entanglement principles that allowed for navigation capabilities beyond current scientific understanding. Dr. James Chen, head of xenotechnology research, walked Rodriguez through the latest developments. "The adaptive nano-armor is now capable of responding to energy signatures we haven't even encountered yet," he explained, bringing up a molecular simulation that showed materials literally changing their atomic structure in real time. The facility was more than a research center. It was humanity's insurance policy, a comprehensive preparation for a moment many had hoped would never come. Each technology developed here was a piece of a larger strategic puzzle. Communication networks that could bypass known physical limitations. Energy manipulation technologies that could potentially rewrite the laws of physics. Artificial intelligence systems so advanced they could predict and neutralize potential threats before they fully formed. "Our alliance network is now complete," Rodriguez muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Over the past decade, they had cultivated relationships with marginalized species across the galaxy, not through traditional diplomatic channels, but through carefully orchestrated technological exchanges, strategic information sharing, and a fundamental understanding of systemic oppression. A holographic display showed these connections, thin lines connecting different civilizations, each representing a carefully maintained relationship. To an outside observer, it might look like a random collection of connections. To those who understood, it was a meticulously designed resistance network. Martinez brought up the final piece of their preparation. Quantum communication network is at full operational capability, she reported. We can now communicate across galactic distances with zero lag, completely undetectable by current alien monitoring technologies. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not just prepared for a potential conflict, they had prepared to fundamentally reshape the entire concept of interstellar communication and conflict. Rodriguez allowed himself the slightest smile. Decades of secret preparation were about to bear fruit. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The shadows were about to step into the light. The holographic projection shifted, a kaleidoscope of data that seemed to breathe with its own life. Jessica Hartley stood at the epicenter of the Galactic Council chamber, her presence a focused storm of intellectual precision. Each movement of her hand was calculated, each data point a precision-guided missile aimed at the heart of galactic political mythology. "Let us begin," she announced, her voice cutting through the chamber like a quantum laser, with the fundamental lie of galactic governance. The first layer of data materialized, a comprehensive timeline of technological suppression that stretched back centuries. Civilizations that had shown promise were systematically strangled, their potential deliberately crushed by an intricate web of economic and political manipulation. Ambassador Corell of the Nexus Confederation leaned forward, his insectoid compound eyes reflecting the cascading information. The Craxian delegation shifted uncomfortably, mandibles clicking in a rhythm that suggested growing unease. Jessica zoomed in on the Orion cluster, a region long considered a backwater of galactic development. "Observe," she said, her fingers tracing holographic trade routes that had been deliberately blocked. 17 separate civilizations, each with unique technological potential, systematically prevented from achieving faster-than-light travel. The data was merciless. Patent records showed hundreds of breakthrough technologies that had been buried, communication channels that had been deliberately disrupted, economic sanctions that had strangled innovation at its source. This was not just information. It was an autopsy of galactic oppression. Zornak, the Craxian representative, attempted to interrupt. "These are historical. These are ongoing." Jessica cut him off, her voice a blade of surgical precision. Another layer of data materialized, showing current suppression mechanisms. Economic flows that funneled resources away from emerging civilizations. Communication networks designed to limit technological exchange. Strategic interventions that kept potential competitors perpetually underdeveloped. The chamber grew silent. Even the ambient environmental systems seemed to pause, as if holding their breath. "Let me introduce you to the Meridian Protocols," Jessica continued, bringing up a complex series of legal and economic frameworks that had existed for millennia. Each protocol was a mechanism of control designed to maintain the current power structure. Trade restrictions that appeared benign on the surface revealed themselves as sophisticated tools of systemic oppression. A holographic representation showed how these protocols worked. Emerging civilizations would develop a promising technology, only to find their patents buried, their communication channels restricted, their economic potential artificially limited. It was not outright conquest. It was something far more insidious. Ambassador Corell's antennae began to twitch rapidly, a sign of extreme cognitive dissonance among his species. The human was not just presenting a case. She was conducting a comprehensive forensic analysis of galactic governance. Jessica's next move was even more devastating. She began to pull apart the economic models that had maintained the current power structure. Trade agreements that appeared beneficial revealed themselves as carefully constructed traps. Communication protocols designed to facilitate exchange were actually elaborate mechanisms of control. "Consider the Quantum Communication Limitation Act," she said, zooming in on a specific piece of legislation that had existed for over 2 centuries. Ostensibly created to prevent technological proliferation, it has effectively kept emerging civilizations in a state of perpetual technological adolescence. The data was irrefutable. Each piece of evidence was cross-referenced, each claim backed by layers of documentation that had been hidden in plain sight. Jessica was not just making an argument. She was performing a systematic vivisection of the entire galactic political system. Delegates from species that had considered themselves powerful began to look small, insignificant. The carefully constructed narrative of galactic governance was being torn apart, layer by layer, with a clinical precision that was both terrifying and beautiful. "This is not about blame," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a tone that promised transformation. "This is about understanding. This is about change." The chamber had become a crucible of potential revolution. Every delegate understood that something fundamental was shifting. The way civilizations had understood their place in the universe was being rewritten in real time. Jessica Hartley was not just presenting a case. She was laying the groundwork for a cosmic revolution, and she was just getting started. A moment of absolute silence descended upon the Galactic Council chamber. The holographic displays continued to pulse with damning evidence, casting an ethereal blue light across the stunned faces of delegates from 100 different worlds. Jessica Hartley stood at the epicenter of this moment, her posture a perfect blend of military discipline and diplomatic precision. "It's time for war," she proclaimed. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. But this was not a call for traditional conflict. This was a comprehensive strategy of systemic dismantling that would redefine the very concept of interstellar engagement. As if responding to her declaration, the holographic displays transformed. Gone were the static charts and data streams. Instead, a living, breathing network of potential emerged, a visualization of alliances that would shake the foundations of galactic politics. Ambassador Corell of the Nexus Confederation leaned forward, his insectoid compound eyes attempting to process the magnitude of what was unfolding. Zornak of the Craxian delegation shifted uncomfortably, the exoskeletal plates of his body creating a soft, unsettling, rattling sound. The first alliance materialized, the Marginal Species Coalition. Civilizations that had been systematically suppressed, kept intentionally below their true potential, now connected through a network of quantum communication channels. Each civilization was marked with its unique technological potential, previously hidden or deliberately restricted. "For centuries, you have maintained control through division," Jessica continued, her voice a surgical instrument cutting through millennia of political obfuscation. "We are here to show you a different approach." The weapon systems began to materialize in the holographic display. They were not traditional armaments, but something far more terrifying. Technological capabilities that seemed to bend the very fabric of space-time. Quantum entanglement communication networks that could transmit information faster than light, rendering traditional communication blockades obsolete. Adaptive AI defense grids that could predict and neutralize threats before they could even be conceived. Energy manipulation technologies that could restructure matter at the molecular level. Each technology was a statement, each capability a revolution. "These are not weapons of destruction," Jessica explained, her hand moving across the display. "These are tools of liberation." A series of simulations began to play out. Economic systems that had kept emerging civilizations in perpetual economic slavery were systematically dismantled. Communication channels that had been artificially restricted burst open. Technological patents that had been buried for centuries were suddenly made universally accessible. The Marginal Species Coalition was more than a military alliance. It was a comprehensive system of technological and cultural exchange that would fundamentally reshape galactic development. Ambassador Corell's translator implant began to overheat, struggling to process the implications of what was being presented. The carefully constructed hierarchies of galactic civilization were being rewritten in real time. Jessica zoomed in on specific technological developments. A civilization in the Epsilon cluster had been developing quantum computing technologies that could revolutionize information processing. Another, in the dark regions beyond the Orion Arm, had created adaptive materials that could fundamentally change construction and energy production. These were not just technologies. These were potential revolutions. "We are not seeking conquest," Jessica declared, her voice cutting through the growing tension. "We are seeking liberation. We are seeking potential." The holographic displays showed potential futures, civilizations freed from artificial constraints, technological exchanges that had been deliberately prevented now flowing freely, a galaxy of potential, suddenly unleashed. Zornak attempted to interrupt, but the display anticipated his objection. The comprehensive breakdown of the Craxian delegation's own suppression mechanisms materialized, revealing the intricate ways they had maintained their power. The weapon was information. The strategy was transparency. "This is not a war of destruction," Jessica said, her final words a promise and a threat. "This is a war of potential. This is a war of liberation." The Galactic Council chamber had become something else entirely. No longer a place of bureaucratic negotiations, but a crucible of cosmic transformation. The declaration was complete. The revolution had begun. Chaos erupted in the Galactic Council chamber. The carefully maintained veneer of diplomatic decorum shattered like fragile crystalline glass, revealing the raw, primal tensions that had been building for millennia. Ambassador Corell of the Nexus Confederation rose first, his insectoid body trembling with a combination of rage and something else, something that looked disturbingly like hope. His translator implant crackled with interference, a technological manifestation of the unprecedented moment. "This is unprecedented," bellowed Zornak, the Craxian representative, his exoskeletal plates expanding in a display of intimidation that would have terrified lesser species. But Jessica Hartley did not even flinch. Around the chamber, delegates from 100 worlds began to fracture into distinct reactions. Some alien species panicked, their holographic projections flickering with erratic energy. Others prepared defensive postures, communication tentacles or appendages moving in complex defensive patterns. But a select few, those long-oppressed civilizations that had existed in the margins of galactic society, began to show something entirely unexpected. Hope. Pure, unfiltered potential. The Marginal Species Coalition, which humanity had carefully cultivated in secret, began to activate. Quantum communication channels, previously hidden or suppressed, lit up across the galaxy. It was not a military network, but something far more dangerous. A network of shared potential. Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, watching from the hidden command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, tracked the reactions in real time. Holographic displays showed communication patterns, political shifts, and technological exchanges happening faster than any previous galactic event. Nexus Confederation communication channels are destabilizing, reported Dr. Elena Martinez, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces. "They're trying to maintain their communication blockades, but our quantum entanglement networks are cutting through their defenses like they're made of paper." The truly revolutionary aspect of humanity's strategy was becoming clear. This was not about military conquest. This was about systematic liberation. Economic data streams began to shift. Technological patents that had been buried for centuries suddenly became universally accessible. Communication channels that had been artificially restricted burst open like dam balls. Each civilization connected to the Marginal Species Coalition began to share technologies, cultural insights, and potential that had been deliberately suppressed. Ambassador Corell's compound eyes began to process the implications. The carefully constructed hierarchies of galactic civilization were being rewritten in real time. Technological potential that had been artificially constrained was suddenly, dramatically unleashed. "We are not seeking to replace your systems," Jessica's voice cut through the chaos, a laser of precision and potential. "We are seeking to liberate them." The Craxian delegation's defense mechanisms began to fail. Their communication encryption, once considered unbreakable, was being systematically dismantled by adaptive AI systems that seemed to anticipate every defensive move before it could be implemented. Holographic displays around the chamber showed the cascading effects. A civilization in the Epsilon cluster, previously restricted from developing quantum computing, suddenly had full access to technologies that had been hidden for generations. Another, in the dark regions beyond the Orion Arm, found communication channels opening that connected them to potential allies across the galaxy. Rodriguez watched the displays, a slight smile crossing his weathered features. Decades of preparation were bearing fruit. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The Galactic Council chamber had transformed. No longer a place of bureaucratic negotiation, it had become a crucible of cosmic potential. Each delegate understood that something fundamental was shifting. The way civilizations had understood their place in the universe was being rewritten in real time. "This is not destruction," Jessica proclaimed, her final words a promise and a challenge. "This is evolution." Some delegates raged. Some trembled. Some, those who had been waiting, hoping, dreaming, began to understand that everything was about to change. The reaction was complete. The transformation had begun. The first wave of intervention began not with weapons, but with information. Deep within the Colorado Advanced Research Facility, Colonel Marcus Rodriguez watched as adaptive AI systems launched a comprehensive strike against the hegemony's infrastructure. Quantum computing clusters hummed with an intensity that made the facility's massive cooling systems work overtime. Each calculation was a precision-guided missile of pure information. "Targeting primary communication networks," announced Dr. Elena Martinez, her fingers moving across holographic interfaces that seemed to respond to her thoughts. The screen showed a living, breathing map of galactic communication channels, each line a potential vulnerability, each node a point of systematic intervention. The attack was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Traditional warfare relied on physical destruction. Humanity's approach was surgical, molecular, almost philosophical in its precision. Communication networks began to fragment, not through brute force attacks, but through adaptive algorithms that understood and dismantled encryption systems faster than they could be rebuilt. Economic data streams were restructured, revealing centuries of hidden manipulation. Technological patents that had been buried were suddenly, dramatically exposed. Nexus Confederation primary encryption breaking down in Sector 7, Martins reported, her voice calm despite the revolutionary implications. A holographic representation showed communication channels collapsing like intricate glass structures, each fracture revealing deeper layers of systemic suppression. Rodriguez studied the displays, decades of strategic preparation manifest in every calculated movement. "Maintain precision," he muttered. "We're not here to destroy. We're here to liberate." The Marginal Species Coalition began to activate in perfect synchronization. Civilizations that had been artificially limited suddenly found themselves connected through quantum communication networks that bypassed traditional interstellar communication restrictions. Technologies that had been suppressed for generations began to flow freely. In the Epsilon cluster, a civilization that had been prevented from developing advanced quantum computing suddenly found itself with full access to technologies that would transform their entire understanding of scientific potential. Beyond the Orion Arm, another species discovered communication channels opening, connecting them to potential allies across the galaxy. The strike was comprehensive. Economic systems that had kept emerging civilizations in perpetual technological adolescence were systematically dismantled. Communication blockades were rendered obsolete. Technological exchanges that had been artificially restricted burst open like a dam of potential. Adaptive AI Defense Grid at 98.7% efficiency announced a computer system, its voice a perfect blend of mathematical precision and something almost approaching excitement. Zornak of the Craxian delegation would later describe the intervention as something beyond warfare. It was a systematic restructuring of galactic potential. Their defensive mechanisms, once considered unbreakable, were being anticipated and neutralized before they could even be fully conceived. The weapon systems were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Quantum entanglement communication networks transmitted information faster than light. Adaptive AI systems predicted and neutralized potential threats with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Energy manipulation technologies could restructure matter at the molecular level. But these were not weapons of destruction. They were tools of liberation. Rodriguez watched as the first layer of intervention completed. Holographic displays showed cascading effects across galactic communication and economic systems. Each intervention was carefully calculated, each move designed to minimize direct conflict while maximum potential was unleashed. Marginal Species Coalition network stability at 99.2%. Martins reported. The quantum communication channels hummed with potential, connecting civilizations that had been deliberately kept isolated for generations. The truly revolutionary aspect of humanity's strategy became crystal clear. This was not about military conquest. This was about systematic liberation, about potential, about fundamentally reshaping the way civilizations could interact and develop. Strike Phase 1 complete, Rodriguez murmured, watching the holographic displays that showed a galaxy in the midst of unprecedented transformation. The first strike was over. The real revolution was just beginning. The conflict rapidly transformed from a potential war to a systemic restructuring of galactic governance. Humanity's approach defied every conventional understanding of interstellar conflict, becoming something far more nuanced and revolutionary. Colonel Marcus Rodriguez studied the holographic displays in the underground command center. Each projection told a story of unprecedented transformation. The Marginal Species Coalition was no longer just an alliance. It had become a living, breathing network of potential. Communication channels stabilizing across 17 previously isolated star systems, reported Dr. Elena Martinez. Her fingers moved across quantum interfaces that seemed to breathe with their own intelligence. Technological exchange rates exceeding all historical projections by 427%. The truly radical nature of humanity's intervention became increasingly clear. This was not conquest. This was liberation through information, potential, and systemic restructuring. In the Epsilon cluster, a civilization that had been technologically suppressed for centuries suddenly found itself connected to a galactic network of scientific and cultural exchange. Their quantum computing developments, previously buried under layers of economic restriction, now flowed freely. Engineers and scientists who had been working in isolation discovered colleagues across the galaxy, their research suddenly amplified by collective potential. Ambassador Jessica Hartley continued her systematic dismantling of galactic power structures. Each diplomatic intervention was a precision strike, not of military might, but of information and potential. The hegemony's control mechanisms were being surgically extracted, layer by layer. The Craxian delegation's communication networks began to fragment. Their once impenetrable encryption systems collapsed under the weight of adaptive AI algorithms that seemed to understand their defensive mechanisms before they could be fully implemented. It was not destruction. It was transformation. Rodriguez watched as the holographic displays showed a living map of galactic potential. Communication channels that had been artificially restricted for generations suddenly burst open. Economic systems that had kept emerging civilizations in perpetual technological adolescence were systematically dismantled. "We are not seeking to replace existing systems," Jessica had proclaimed in the Galactic Council chamber. "We are seeking to liberate them." The intervention revealed layers of systemic oppression that few had fully understood. Trade agreements that appeared beneficial were exposed as sophisticated mechanisms of control. Communication protocols designed to facilitate exchange were actually elaborate tools of limitation. Ambassador Carell of the Nexus Confederation found himself in an unprecedented position. The carefully constructed hierarchies of galactic civilization were being rewritten in real time. Compound eyes that had once viewed humanity as a minor, inconsequential species now struggled to process the magnitude of the transformation. Adaptive AI systems continued their precise interventions. Each communication channel, each economic flow, each technological patent was systematically analyzed and restructured. The goal was not destruction, but potential. Not conquest, but liberation. In the dark regions beyond the Orion Arm, civilizations that had been deliberately kept isolated began to connect. Technological exchanges that had been suppressed for generations now flowed freely. Scientists who had worked in isolation discovered colleagues across the galaxy, their research suddenly amplified by collective potential. Marginal Species Coalition network integrity at 99.8%, Martins reported. The quantum communication channels hummed with an energy that was almost alive, connecting civilizations that had been deliberately kept apart for generations. The true weapon was not physical destruction. It was potential. It was the radical notion that every civilization had the right to develop, to communicate, to grow. Rodriguez allowed himself a slight smile. Decades of preparation, of careful strategic planning, were bearing fruit. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The Galactic Council chamber had transformed from a place of bureaucratic negotiation to a crucible of cosmic potential. Each delegate understood that something fundamental was shifting. The way civilizations had understood their place in the universe was being rewritten in real time. This is not about human dominance, Jessica had declared. This is about collective potential. Some delegates raged. Some trembled. Those who had been waiting, hoping, dreaming began to understand that everything was about to change. The turning point was complete. The revolution had begun. The Galactic Council chamber stood transformed, no longer a symbol of bureaucratic oppression, but a testament to collective potential. Jessica Hartley walked the now quiet hall, her footsteps echoing with the weight of cosmic change. Holographic displays continued to pulse with the aftermath of humanity's revolutionary intervention. The Marginal Species Coalition had become more than an alliance. It was a living network of technological and cultural exchange that would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. Colonel Marcus Rodriguez watched from the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, decades of strategic preparation manifest in every calculated moment. The holographic displays showed a galaxy in the midst of unprecedented transformation. Communication channels that had been artificially restricted for millennia now flowed freely. Technological potential that had been deliberately suppressed now burst forth with incredible momentum. Total network integration at 99.9%, reported Dr. Elena Martinez, her voice a blend of scientific precision and something approaching wonder. The quantum communication networks hummed with an energy that seemed almost alive, connecting civilizations that had been deliberately kept isolated for generations. Ambassador Corell of the Nexus Confederation stood near the chamber's edge, his insectoid body trembling with a complex mixture of emotions. The carefully constructed hierarchies of galactic civilization had been completely rewritten. What had begun as a potential conflict had become a renaissance of cooperation and potential. The intervention had revealed layers of systemic oppression that few had fully understood. Trade agreements that appeared beneficial were exposed as sophisticated mechanisms of control. Communication protocols designed to facilitate exchange were actually elaborate tools of limitation. Now those limitations had been systematically dismantled. In the Epsilon cluster, a civilization that had been technologically suppressed for centuries found itself at the forefront of a new era of scientific exchange. Their quantum computing developments, previously buried under layers of economic restriction, now became a cornerstone of galactic technological advancement. Jessica approached the central platform, her movements deliberate. She was no longer just a diplomat. She had become an architect of cosmic potential. "We are not conquerors," she had proclaimed earlier. "We are liberators." The Craxian delegation's once impenetrable communication networks had been completely restructured. Their encryption systems, previously considered unbreakable, had collapsed under the weight of adaptive AI algorithms that seemed to understand defensive mechanisms before they could be fully implemented. Rodriguez studied the final stages of intervention. Each communication channel, each economic flow, each technological patent had been systematically analyzed and restructured. The goal was not destruction, but potential. Not conquest, but liberation. The true revolutionary aspect of humanity's strategy became crystal clear. This was a fundamental reimagining of how civilizations could interact, communicate, and evolve. Ambassador Corell's compound eyes struggled to process the magnitude of the transformation. Civilizations that had been marginalized, kept intentionally below their true potential, were now connected through a network of unprecedented communication and technological exchange. Marginal Species Coalition stability confirmed, Martins reported. The quantum communication channels continued to hum with potential, a living network of shared knowledge and collective advancement. The weapon had never been physical destruction. It was potential. It was the radical notion that every civilization had the right to develop, to communicate, to grow. Jessica Hartley became a symbol of this new approach, not a conqueror, but a catalyst. Not a destroyer, but a creator of potential. In the dark regions beyond the Orion Arm, civilizations that had been deliberately kept isolated began to flourish. Technological exchanges that had been suppressed for generations now flowed freely. Scientists who had worked in isolation discovered colleagues across the galaxy, their research suddenly amplified by collective potential. The Galactic Council chamber had become something entirely new, no longer a place of bureaucratic negotiation, but a crucible of cosmic transformation. Each delegate understood that something fundamental had shifted. The way civilizations understood their place in the universe had been completely rewritten. Some delegates still rage. Some continued to tremble. But those who had been waiting, hoping, dreaming now understood that everything had changed. Jessica looked out across the transformed chamber. The revolution was complete. A new order had begun. The universe watched and learned.